In the spring of 2006, I rode a rattling train from my dorm in downtown Chicago to a neighborhood called Albany Park on the north side. I was a lanky college student living in a dreamland. I wanted to find the fringe of the world and plant my teepee there, shape signals with the smoke, and send them up for anyone else whose eye was drawn to distant horizons where life felt gritty and urgent and true, and where you could feel the pulse of divine movement, a good spirit somehow stirring. The summer before, I'd been to Afghanistan, where I saw buildings with rocket holes blown clear through them, and met a little boy with a father who was killed in a war and a sister who died when she was 10 from breathing in carpet fibers at the factory where she worked. It was in these shattered chasms where I felt a new and strange longing for restoration. That's what drew me up to Albany Park the following spring, I think. To take a train up to a neighborhood where there were no Urban Outfitters or Starbucks, and interview for an internship working with recently arrived refugees. I bathed in the wonder of it as I wandered toward the second-story office building, and the smells of Mexican pastries and bus fumes and stale urine wafted over the littered sidewalks. 11 years later, I still return to that office daily. I call it work now. I'm still dreamy, still just as lanky, only a little more grounded in reality. And a lot of people think I'm in college when they meet me. But forces in the world have drastically reshaped the landscape of global refugee issues since that time. For years, when I told people what I do for a living, they suddenly became my moral cheerleader, high-fiving me for being a player in a game they wished they could join if it weren't for their full-time job, their house full of kids. Church people especially responded with empathetic curiosity. Their tones started to change, though, in the fall of 2015. That September, a hurricane swept in while we were all out on the beach sipping mimosas. The image of a Syrian boy who drowned when his family tried to get to Greece from Turkey stirred the world's conscience and inspired a flash of international compassion. Weeks later, Islamic terrorists attacked Paris. A fake Syrian passport was found near one of their self-exploded bodies, and the world scattered into fast-made, flimsy shelters of its own, one called pro-refugee and one called anti-refugee. In the U.S., a gang of bickering politicians managed to hijack the dialogue and strong-arm Americans onto opposing sides, even as they continued verbally abusing and trampling each other in their fight toward the White House. When we cast our votes the following November, Americans would decide if we would stay true to our values and open our arms wide to a hurting world like the Canadians and the Germans, or if we would be wise and vigilant, stiffen our boundaries, turn inward, build up our walls. These were our only choices, they said. Vulnerable and displaced people across the world watched while the winds blew about us and we argued our way toward Election Day. I don't know if the choice I made on November 8th was right or wrong, but I do know that my vote was the public outworking of private decisions that I have labored through every day since 2006. Every day working in refugee resettlement, I have to decide, will I search out the humanity in the people I serve and welcome them as a means of grace into my life? Will I build walls around myself that may prevent me from seeing their personhood? Or will I find some way to function with generous empathy and shrewd caution at the same time? Every day demands an intentional response from me, just as the 2016 election demanded a response from the American people. We know how we answered. A few days from when I write these words, Donald Trump will take office. He will announce on his authority how many refugees the U.S. will accept for the remainder of the year and what countries they will come from. By the time you read or hear this, we will know. He will repeat this ritual for 3 or 7 more years, and his decisions will shape the life paths of thousands of displaced people. But even as the ideas and narratives thrown around during the election season begin to morph into policy, I suspect, I hope, that many people, especially those of us who fall under the broad and confusing term evangelical, still feel lost in the middle, continuing to decide in our inner lives what posture toward refugees is right. This no man's land is where I hope to inject my small collection of stories. They are an invitation into my world, a place where I have fought with myself for years as a refugee resettlement worker between choosing to see personhood or problems, to listen for new stories or stick to my agenda, to open my arms or to stay distant and guarded. I tell these stories through the broad lens of my faith. At a few points, I bring parts of the traditional Christian narrative into sharp focus in order to speak straight to the evangelical community about its posture toward refugees. But I trust that listeners who don't speak Christianese will be able to meet me in these strange and sacred moments just as easily. Whatever your worldview, it's vital that we continue to listen to the story of global displacement however we can. The current crisis will fade from the headlines, but the mountain will loom heavy and dark behind the fog. It will continue to call us to the fringe and present us with costly decisions. It will continue to demand a response, both personal and public.